The Nasik cave complex is located in the modern Indian state of Maharashtra. The caves were excavated to act as religious dwellings, and in them are engraved several inscriptions recording donations, sometimes associated with royal houses that ruled over the region. Amongst the interesting elements are that several of these mention gifts of money. The Nasik inscriptions are not the earliest references to money that survive from ancient India. There are lots of texts that are much older than this, nor are they particularly early in the use of money. Physical representations of money in the form of coins predate the inscriptions by at least 4 centuries. However, coins are often mute witnesses to their own use, and texts, while they contain much that is older, are complicated multi-layered things preserved only in very late copies, and their descriptions are hard to locate in time and space. Not so inscriptions, and in rare cases documents. Inscriptions are vocal, and they can be situated very precisely in time and space. Those at Nasik, like the construction of the caves, span a period from the 1st to the 5th century AD, and are amongst the earliest inscriptions to record gifts of money. Not all of them, of course. We can distinguish 3 different types of donative record with regard to money, perhaps reflecting different practices or donors, or just different periods. Most inscriptions make no reference to how the work or gift was funded. Some do, but do not mention money, and some involve monetary transactions. But remember, not all coin is money, and not all money is coin. That distinction is going to become important in trying to interpret these. Let us start with the very first group, those that do not mention any form of exchange. This is an example from Cave 11, an estampage which is a sort of rubbing frequently used to record inscriptions. It features 2 names. Because of the way Brahmi inscriptions are written, the father's name Shivamita comes first, but the donation is by the son, Ramanaka, and all it tells us is that the cave is a pious gift. Though not royalty, Ramanaka must have been very wealthy, part of an urban elite. Everybody who appears in inscriptions is, because inscriptions are expensive, and so is excavating a cave for the use of the monastic community. This is not a record that this man dug the cave. The actual work would have been done by somebody else. Did that involve payment? Some type of forced labour? We don't know. And that is the case with most inscriptions. They usually record the gift of something and the person who wants credit for it, but they are opaque when it comes to the actual people who did the work and any financial transaction that took place in order for it to happen. The second type of donation is one which describes the transaction, but in which money does not feature. There are a few inscriptions like this, a lengthy one in Cave 3 associated with a Satvahana king, and a shorter one in Cave 8. There are, in fact, 2 inscriptions in Cave 8, both referring to the same donation, but only one of them records that Dharmadanin gave a field and instructed, as Senart translates it, that clothes are to be provided from it to the monks. That's not an unusual arrangement. Sometimes whole villages might be made over to a religious order, and the order presumably gets to draw on those lands for income of some sort. If the translation here is correct, this cannot simply be, and it probably never was, that the monk owns the field. After all, the field is not growing clothes, and the monk presumably isn't tilling it. So some other unspecified exchange must be going on. Does the field generate a cash crop which would pay for the clothes? Is it leased to a sharecropper who now becomes responsible for the supply of those clothes as part of the rent? Again, the details are opaque. But this is a good example of what's called redistributive exchange, where an authority, in this case the donor, simply reallocates resources. Redistributive exchange does not necessarily involve money. It can, think of something like modern taxes, but it doesn't need to. Ask yourself, why does the inscription bother to specify this? Plenty of other inscriptions don't specify what financial transactions are going on. Why does this one do it? Because it doesn't need to. And that question of why somebody is taking the trouble to specify the financial transaction is one we're going to explore in the rest of the episode. There are 2 caves with inscriptions referring to monetary gifts. 10 and 12. We'll start with cave 12 and a donation by another Ramataka. Not the same person, it's just a really common name. This Ramataka gives 100 karshapanas to the community. I've marked the term in the inscription, from which was to be drawn 12 karshapanas as a chivarika, which Senart translates as cloth money. What is a karshapana? Well, numismatists use the term to refer to these coins. This is one from the American Numismatic Society's online database, a useful resource if I've not mentioned that before. It's cut from a sheet of metal and stamped with a series of individual punches, and it usually weighs 3 to 3.5 grams. Coins of this particular type were first issued in Magadha, roughly the modern Indian state of Bihar, and came to dominate North Indian currency in the late 4th century BC. Obviously, this is not what is being referred to in the early centuries AD in Western India. This is a silver coin associated with Western India, a remarkably persistent type that begins in the 1st century AD and continues throughout the lifetime of the caves. It is usually called a drama or Indian dram by numismatists. It weighs about 2 grams and it is die-struck, not punch-marked. The labels of numismatists are often at odds with contemporary usage, so perhaps this is the karshapana of the inscription? We'll come back to that in a moment. For now, I just want to draw a little attention to the date. The one in the ANS is wrong. Nahapana ruled in the mid to late 1st century AD, not in the early 2nd. That is going to be important later. You can't expect large collections to be up to date on every bit of scholarship, so there'll always be small discrepancies like the dating on this coin. Let's turn to cave 10. There are 7 inscriptions here. 2 are gifts of Dakamitra, daughter of the Western satrap king Nahapana, whose coin we've just seen. These are simple gifts with no additional information. The rest are gifts of her husband, Ushavadatta, and several feature money. We will look at one of those, which is recorded multiple times in the cave. Ushavadatta gives 3,000 karshapanas, and like the inscription of Ramataka, this was not given directly to the monks living in the caves, but rather in 2 sections to guilds of weavers, who then provide chivarika to the monks on a monthly basis. These are guilds of weavers, so monks' robes is a reasonable request to them. There's similarly in these inscriptions a purchase of a field for 4,000 karshapanas to provide food, which again is something you can draw directly from a field. But monks don't need monthly replacements for their robes, and Senart was only able to make sense of the interest drawn on this gift if it was paid monthly. In any case, why not just tell the weavers to provide the monks with robes in kind? Why specify the payment in monetary terms? Given this, some commentators have preferred to see this as a cash stipend, a monthly payment the monks could spend more freely than simply on clothes. Senart did assume there was such a stipend, but he assigned it to another term in the inscription, Kushana Mula, and this is the kind of problem you get with using a translation that is over 100 years old. Scholarship moves on. Kushana Mula seems to be a local variant of Kushala Mula, which is frequently encountered in Gandharan inscriptions from the northwest that are much better served by recent translations. And the term seems to mean something like root of merit, which, given the information in the Gandharan inscriptions, I understand to mean that these 2 things in the inscription here are actually both being used for the same purpose. What we have is a stipend whose allocation accrued spiritual merit for the donor. There is another wrinkle in this. Below one of the inscriptions is engraved an addendum about 3 years later. It is not clear in this addendum who is receiving the gift and what it is for. It might simply be adding additional information about the existing donation or recording additional money. The bit we are interested in is that it sets an exchange rate of 35-1 between the karshapana used in the other parts of the inscription and something called a suvarna. The term suvarna is sometimes used in Indian texts for a gold coin, and there has been a persistent tendency to read this as saying that 35 silver coins, karshapanas, make 1 gold coin, suvarna, which superficially makes sense, until you realise there is no gold coinage in this part of India. Nahapana and his successors simply did not mint any. Just to get it out of the way, the gold coin numismatists generally call a suvarna is a heavy coin weighing over 9 grams, not issued until the 4th and 5th centuries AD. So it's obviously not that. But as we've already discussed, numismatists' labels are frequently at odds with the contemporary usage. Perhaps suvarna is referring to a gold coin in the 1st century AD? The problem is that gold coins were not regularly minted in South Asia until late in the reign of the Kushan Emperor Kanishka I, in the middle of the 2nd century AD. And they were novel within that dynasty, being introduced only early in the 2nd century AD under Wima Kadphises. Nahapana must have come to power in the mid-1st century. The 45th year of his reign might just have overlapped with this introduction. It probably didn't, but it might have. And even if it did, a sporadic issue of gold coins at bulk is not going to provide a circulating currency in Maharashtra. Some historians, wedded to the notion that these names refer to coins, have gone so far as to suggest the suvarnas might be Roman coins, coming in through West Indian ports. And we know for certain that Roman coins did come to India. In this sort of period, the standard listing for these is Turner's Roman coins in India. But the idea that so many had entered circulation that 2,000 might be used in a routine transaction is, well, I'll be polite and say doubtful. So, how are we to read these terms if they are not coins? If at least one of them cannot be a coin? The answer is that they are probably units of account. What is the difference between a unit of account and a coin? Imagine you go to a market stand and it's selling bottles of water, and the price label is a rather steep 50 rupees. Unless the stall insists that you give them exactly 50 1 rupee coins, then rupee is a unit of account. But if you're at the shops and want a trolley, and this might be culturally specific, maybe this only happens in the UK, viewers from around the world will have to tell me, but in the UK, you need a £1 deposit in order to collect the trolley, placed into a machine connected to the trolley itself. So it's not just any set of coins to the value of £1, or even any physical representation of a pound. You specifically need a current pound coin for the locking mechanism. If an archaeologist was to dig up those two imaginary price tags in 2,000 years' time, how would they know the difference? That the first one is a unit of account and the second one is specifying a coin. Sometimes, of course, a source itself might specify. This is a contract written in the early 7th century in Bactria. A number of Bactrian inscriptions survive, many of them containing details of economic transactions, and they've been published by Nicholas Sims Williams in 3 volumes. The contracts contain a common provision that if breached, the offending party pays a penalty as a specific number of struck gold coins, which it calls a dinar. The term dinar turns up far more frequently in technical works than suvarna when somebody wants to refer to a gold coin. In these documents, we know actual coins are intended. You could not apparently pay the fine in the equivalent value of copper or silver, so it's not a unit of account. Those documents probably deserve their own episode, but back to the inscription at Nasik. I think at Nasik we have to read all of this as units of account. It isn't simply that there is no gold coin that could be indicated by the suvarna. It is that we have good practical reasons to believe few physical coins actually changed hands. Let us think for a moment about why these sorts of monetary arrangements exist and why they are recorded. Why not simply say that the donor had seen to the needs of the monks in this cave and spiritually benefited? Gregory Schopen offers some thoughts on this in an article on the Buddhist monastic code, the Mulasarvastivada Vinaya. You will find it in this article, but it's also reprinted with related articles in Schopen's collected works. The text tells a story which begins with the lay people deciding they should give a perpetuity to the monastic community for building purposes. And as Schopen notes, the same term, aksaya, is used in both the inscription and the text. And the similarities with the story don't end there. Someone once nicknamed these stupid monk stories, and it's a good moniker because the narrative drive is frequently the complete lack of common sense and initiative on the part of the monks, which requires the Buddha to intervene and expand or elucidate the rule. In this case, the lay people turn up and find no work has been done. They ask the monks, and the monks respond that they do not have any karshapana, the same term that our inscription uses. The monks, having messed up the donation, go to the Buddha, and the Buddha basically tells them to invest the money and depend on the interest, which, again, is what is recorded in the inscription. The monks go off and invest it with people who have conflicts of interest or lack the resources to pay them back, so that eventually the Buddha has to lay out the rules of who you invest with and the importance of getting a written contract. Something not entirely unlike the inscription in Cave 10. And you can imagine, with an ongoing commitment, how important writing these sorts of terms down are. Now obviously, these stories are not records of actual events. The Buddha was long dead before anyone needed to worry about written contracts, and the monastic order would not have endured if it were anything like as incompetent as the Mulasarvastivada Vinaya implies. But it does seem to be a fictional framing of the sort of procedure recorded at Nasik. And it provides us with an explanation for a key question about the Nasik caves. Why engrave the monetary details at all? Because you need to record an ongoing contract. Undoubtedly, other copies of the agreement existed. In fact, the addenda refers to one lodged at a record office, but only the one engraved in stone survives. Legal practicality, not religious merit, explain the need to record the exchange in this sort of case. Though it still leaves some problems. Within just 9 years of the loan, the guilds would have paid out more than the original capital. One wonders how financially appealing such an arrangement would have been in perpetuity. Assuming, of course, that the guild wasn't just looking to take part in a religiously meritorious activity. Schopen points out that a lot of textual sources limit interest to twice the original loan, which at 12% would be just a 16-year commitment. Perhaps it was only perpetual in theory. But if it wasn't really perpetual, and so did not offer a great deal more long-term financial stability than the one-off donations, why involve the guilds? Why not just give the monks the money? Why do both the inscription and the text suggest that the money was instead placed with an institution and doled out to the monks in small instalments? I think at least some of it must be to do with security. We know that monks used money, that coins were stored in monasteries, but there are some practical limitations. Monasteries, these ones included, are often in isolated places, and it makes you wonder how secure they would be if large amounts of precious metal coins, which they would need to be if the numismatist's drama represents the inscription's karshapana, were stored on the premises. But if the karshapana is a unit of count, money, not coin, remember, not all money is coin, not all coin is money, that makes a lot more sense. The monk's monthly stipend was effectively on account with the guild. The monk could withdraw coins if they needed them, perhaps to pay tolls while they were travelling, but they could also accept the chavarika in kind as a new set of robes charged against that account. And this need not be limited to services the guild itself could provide. The guild was a well-established structure with economic and social ties, located, unlike the monastery, within the urban economy. It could presumably facilitate a variety of services. Artists for the paintings we know once decorated the caves, carpenters for the wooden elements of the structure that have rotted away. Exactly the kind of work the lay people in the Mulasarvastivada Vinaya story dedicated the money for, all effectively operating on systems of small-scale credit and against account, recorded in units, karshapana and suvarna, which need not represent actual coins, and which, at least in the case of suvarna, did not represent actual coins because no coin of that type existed in this region. And this is the difficulty most inscriptions pose, and to some extent even texts. It is usually very unclear whether a transaction exists as a unit of account or as a physical coin. In general, it's more likely to be the former, more likely to be like our modern price label, and thus very hard for us to work out what the relationship between units of account and coins actually is. I might do some more episodes on our written evidence for coins in South Asia. It's a really fascinating subject because while coins survive in very large numbers, many of the other forms of economic transactions, small-scale credit, loans, transferable financial instruments, verbal contracts, either can't survive or just don't survive. Just looking at coins can give you a very distorted picture of what's going on. Anyway, thank you for listening, and that's all for today.